This video is special. It's not like anything else I've uploaded on this channel before. It's a dive into a scenario we pray will never happen in our lifetimes, an outlook so bearish it would completely rearrange the world order and ruin not only economies but lives. This is the standoff theory, a radical new look at the current world economy and why its complete collapse is not only likely but inevitable. But before we go down this road of doom, I want to make one thing very clear. I personally don't believe that we're headed this way. In fact, over the long term, I think that the US economy will continue to expand, improve, and innovate, and your money in a US diversified index fund is a bet that will pay off in the next half century, just as it did in the last half century. However, given the current status of the world, I have to admit it's always interesting to hear from the other side, and today's video focuses on exactly that. It's an economic doomsday theory, and it's based on this blog called Zen Second Life. The author outlines one of the most incredible predictions I've ever heard. I'll summarize it, and you decide for yourself what you think. You might be surprised by the end. We begin with the foundation. The entire theory is set up on this principle of pre and post 2008. You see, following the great financial crises, the markets essentially began operating under new rules where continuous monetary bailouts made it possible for the market to rally in a way that we've never seen before. Each time there was a hiccup, the Fed stepped in and fixed the market. What ended up happening was a 13-year bull run where stocks only went up. That's not an exaggeration either. This widely used chart showcases every drawdown since the Great Recession, and you see that since March of 2009, which is when the market bottomed, the S&P 500 had only 2 drawdowns longer than 2 months. That was in 2011 following the European debt crisis and in 2015 following some turbulent economic forecasts in China. Outside of these 2 instances, every drawdown has been short and shallow or both. The market rarely dipped more than 10%, and when it did, the Fed quickly stepped in and made sure to keep the apparatus going. What we ended up with was one of the greatest runs in history, 15% annualized returns between March 2009 and January 2022. Had someone invested $10,000 at the bottom, they would have over $50,000 at the top. But the party had to finally come to an end. You see, while the Fed continued to step into markets and push things higher and higher with bigger and bigger doses of stimulus, they did so without ever having the cancer of economics emerge: inflation. But after years of abuse, in 2022, the symptoms finally showed up. A 9.1% CPI, a 40-year high in inflation. And with this change, everything we know about modern economics is being put to the test right now as we speak. This brings us to this new theory that is emerging that suggests something really bad is about to happen. You see, a lot of people now believe that economic data is deteriorating faster than the markets, and this is happening because the Fed is potentially ignoring escalating signs that things are getting really bad. Everyone knows about the pie in the sky, the soft landing. It's this idea that the Fed can raise rates without causing serious harm to the worldwide economy. The markets are well aware of this fact, and now investors in the Fed are in a standoff. On one side, investors expect the Fed to capitulate and bid up markets, bringing back the old glory days when stocks did nothing but go up. On the other side, the Fed needs investors to reduce risk and bring down asset prices. Right now, neither side has blinked. The standoff is ongoing. Despite a slow move down, the market has yet to see panic. We can visualize this with the VIX index, which measures market volatility. If you take a look, the VIX is rather calm compared to other events like the COVID crisis in 2020. Individual investors have largely stayed the course and remained overinvested in stocks going into a recession, at least according to this theory. And this is because of what I said earlier. They think a pivot is coming, but this couldn't be further from the truth, as inflation has broken the previous free money trick. Gone are the days where you can print your way out of a disaster without invoking serious harm to the currency. And this reality is such a massive deal as Wall Street still doesn't believe it. Way back in May of 2019, before the pandemic, before inflation, and before all of this craziness in the markets, Warren Buffett appeared on CNBC with Bill Gates and Charlie Munger and gave one of the most important interviews ever, in my opinion. Becky Quick asked him how it's possible that the US can print so much money while keeping inflation low and employment full, and Buffett gives an incredible response that now, 2 years later, we're seeing play out in real time. But before I show you the footage, take a second to hit that like and subscribe button if you're enjoying the content thus far. Now back to the clip.
I probably could not have conceived of a world as recently as 10 years ago. I would not have conceived of a world where you would have full employment, 5% budget deficits, with actually the probability of those rising from that level, and at the same time have the long bond at 3%. I would have said that couldn't happen. And then people now, you have this modern monetary theory, which there's no question you should borrow, any country should borrow money in its own currency. I mean, that is not like it's some great discovery or something that's been announced, but
No, but it can be overdone.
yeah, and that's the point. I mean, that hasn't solved anything. Just to say, well, it's much safer to borrow money in your own currency, but the convergence of these factors would have seemed impossible to me, and generally, if I feel something is impossible, it's going to change over time. I don't know in what way, but I don't think we can continue to have these variables in this relationship. Now, if we can, then stocks are ridiculously cheap. Very, very little inflation with a Federal Reserve that put a target for 2% on it not that long ago. And it looks like nirvana. It looks like we found the promised land where we just essentially money doesn't cost anything, and you can print lots of money and have full employment and no inflation.
So basically what he says is that when we have the 10-year at 2.5%, full employment, and stocks rallying despite wild money printing, the reality is one of two things. This is impossible and it can't continue to go this way, or we have found nirvana, aka the promised land, where money printing has no consequences and stocks rally to infinity while inflation remains low. Of course, we all know what would come of this, and finally, after years and years of abuse pulling off the impossible, reality is finally closing in. So what does this mean? Well, the standoff theory ends with investors holding the bag, not realizing that the party is over. The Fed will be unable to pivot in a way that rescues everyone, and once the market becomes aware of this realization, the possibilities are endless as 14 years of speculation comes to an end. Thank you guys for watching. As always, please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed it.